Today we have a very interesting topic that's a little bit outside of the norm. So I recently talked about things that you can learn from the pros, and we will continue that at a future point, but today I wanted to look at one specific pro game where Renegades ran with a completely crazy start by any standard. It's something that is probably not as easily emulated as just taking over some parts from the builds, but we'll see what we can learn from that for us, but it's definitely worth having a look at. I'll let you watch the clip from the first game first, and then we'll go through it slowly and look at the details.
And it is indeed Finch and Aggro here as we move into game number one. Things looking nice up top and looking nice in the game as well here, Aggro. One area where things might not look quite as nice is Aurora is on this Yamoja flashback to that unfortunate first blood he fell where they body blocked him against the wall right near here. But already there's some aggression from Renegade. Cyclone Spin has the beads forced out early.
And this grouping is a little bit odd from Renegades because Solar Troll is even over here. This is something that happened at Season 5 Worlds, I believe, the one where Splice won, where Divios would rotate over and guarantee you this pressure over here in the duo lane. But it's not just Solar Troll, it's Lasbra guaranteeing that Renegade's purple goes down. And Venenu looks like he's, soloed the speed buff by himself, but he picked it up. So now Big Man Tings is going to know that Ven started on that speed, and it kind of throws a lot of the benefit of, well, we don't know where anybody started. It kind of goes out the window with Ven picking up the speed and Lasbra picking up the red, because now Radiance knows exactly where all the timers are and where everyone was.
Well, sure, they lose the timer part, but they get exactly this. Cyclone Spin in trouble, and without the beads early on, first blood for Renegades, and Awesome Jake makes it out. Yeah, you think Ro came in with a game plan? Well, it's looking good here so far.
So this is our starting situation. Awesome Jake, as a support, is starting on the duo side of the map, and together with him is Solo Troll, who will switch over to Soul Lane, with Amaterasu soon. And a little bit behind them is Barracuda and Hachiman as the ADC, and Lasbra as Thanatos, the jungler. And we see that on the other side of the map, Veneno is currently close to the speed buff as Ragin. Also, very important at this point is look at the relics. You will see 3 Hand of the Gods on Renegades, which is a very, very impressively high number, but they all have their purpose. So let's go into this and see what happens in detail. So the first part of the strategy is pretty clear. We have Solo Troll kind of creating a distraction and having the duo lane rotate in with him so that both the enemy duo lane players are getting pressured out. Cyclone Spin and Aurora are both getting pressured out at this point. And what you can see here is that purple is about to spawn. And take note that Lasbra, as the jungler, is not going for the enemy purple. He is going for his team's purple. So we see this pressure going on, and this pressure here is basically kept up until the minions roll in, so that the enemy team Radiance will not be able to clear purple before the minions collide. If we pause here really quickly, we can now also see that Venenu, who is currently on speed buff, has already used his Hand of the Gods, so he has used that to clear the first camp. With Lasbra, we don't see the Hand of the Gods being used here. And we also see that the enemy team, Aurora, has Hand of the Gods as well, but he's not even able to use it because he would lose too much pressure. And what we can also see now is that while we were looking down there basically, Solo Troll has teleported over to the tier 1 tower, not the tier 2 tower, that's important, and went straight over to blue buff from there. That means that he's gonna use his Hand of the Gods next. You can also see that Thanatos, Lasbra, has now used his Hand of the Gods for red buff, and he will be able to clear his blue buff and then get to the wave with just a little bit of delay, and will still get most of the XP. So, the situation in duo right now is, well, no team was really able to build a massive pressure in lane, but one team was able to secure their purple, the other one was not. And now we see one step that's taken against their actions basically is that Big Man Tings here is going for red buff, so he can secure that. And we see that on the solo side, Thor has moved over to the blue buff, so we can see that that will be secured for Radiance, but really, they're splitting the XP for that, whereas on Renegade's side, Solo Troll already got that on his own, so the benefit for them isn't exactly huge in that regard. And the XP loss that Solo Troll might otherwise have is kind of offset by soloing that blue buff as well. So we see Thanatos moving over back towards dual lane now, and moving up to the enemy purple buff. Now this is a bit of a riskier move if he was going to secure that, because we know that Aurora has a Hand of the Gods as well, and could secure that as well if he rotated in. But instead we see Laspera just engaging on the lane, and the enemy team is so deprived of XP or anything else that the level 2 Thanatos is enough to get the first kill here. And now they have 3 players to rotate over to purple if they want to, so that's not really an issue anymore either. What can we overall get from this? You get a very weird shift in who gets which buff. We have Laspera with the red buff right now. You also see that Veneno has the speed buff right now. But especially with Thanatos, a red buff in early game is probably better than a speed buff. Most junglers don't really value speed buff all that much, especially when you're looking at gank potential. And we have the first purple buff actually not being picked up, but the second purple buff here being picked up by Barracuda, so that goes to Renegades as well. We also have the blue buff cleared by Renegade in solo on their own, so they have an XP advantage in that regard, even though they lose a little bit through the minions. And that all combined just gives them a large amount of pressure across the field. They lose a little bit of that in middle lane, because you have a mid laner with speed buff, but that way this mid laner still has a lot of XP, so that is very much fine for them. And with a guard like Radiant, being able to run up very quickly to the enemy isn't even a downside necessarily. Heading into the second game, we see the same strategy again. This time Radiance tries to respond by putting the entire team towards the duo side very early on and keep the enemy at bay basically. But you will see that that isn't actually changing all too much. Because again, the team will split up eventually and everyone will move over to their own lanes, because they haven't practiced the start and they can't just adapt it within one game without having practiced it at all. So they are once again in the same situation. We see the solo laner for Renegades being over in dual lane once again, and they do the exact same thing that they did the game before. They have 3 Hand of the Gods once again, and they are looking to pressure, and they're even looking for a kill this time. They don't quite get it, but they have the pressure that they wanted, and Solo Troll is moving over right to dual lane after that, so he goes over there just in time for the blue buff to spawn, so he can secure that. And again, we see Radiance left without their purple buff, and again, the pressure overall goes to Renegades, with this slightly awkward mix of red buff being on the jungler and speed buff being on the mid laner. We also see once again that Renegades don't pick up their own purple buff, they purely use this for XP, and that shows that this strat is not about getting buffs in the early game, it's just about denying the enemy team early XP and getting a lead with the dual lane, especially in the dual lane, in terms of levels, which gives them a lot of pressure across the map. In the third game, we see Radiance respond a little bit better. This time, Benji is starting in the dual lane as well, with teleport ready so he can go over to solo and fight Solo Troll there. He does not start with Hand of the Gods, however. And in this case, they have 3 people to kind of stay around the purple buff, and they are actually able to secure it because of Hand of the Gods. And Solo Troll is actually delayed a little bit as well, because they keep the pressure on him, so he's a little bit late to solo. So there are responses to this engage, to this start method overall. We also see that at the same time, especially Laspera is still getting his 2 camps of solo farm, and he's still making his way over right to the enemy red, and it's very dangerous for the mid laner of Radiance to be there in the first place, because you don't really want to be facing a jungler early in one-on-one, especially not if you're trying to secure a camp at the same time. And we can see that it kind of goes okay for them here, because adapting makes a quick rotation, but this also means that adapting has kind of adjusted its entire path just for this buff camp. So it's not a start that has no downside, no risk or anything like that, but at the same time, even after all that, the loss that Renegades made from starting in this relatively risky way, overall is relatively low, and they still secure their most important buffs in the end. So I would say this is definitely a very interesting starting strategy overall. And they use the same start against Obey as well. But then again, with the current state of Obey, I don't think it's really worth looking at that in detail, because the outcome is, well, somewhat predictable, I would say. Now, can this start be used in non-competitive at all? I don't think so. Of course, you could do this with a full pre-made somewhere, but the problem is that there are too many specific factors that require specific playstyles for this to be effective. Especially most mid laners will not want to solo speed buff, most duo lanes will not want their jungler to start on purple, even though the jungler is probably fine with doing purple and red because, again, red buff is usually better for them. And having enough coordination to do the whole thing with solo lane is also something you won't necessarily see, even though that part is maybe a little bit more manageable. I could also imagine that, generally speaking, solo laners may start more with Hand of the Gods and start on blue buff instead of starting the double pot start, and that way get some extra XP and have the jungler rotate more towards the duo lane early. But that also depends on the value people put on the totem, and that, again, depends a lot on the player as well. So, not much that we can take from this, just a little bit, but definitely overall a strategy worth keeping in mind. And that's it for today. Let me know if you enjoyed this. And if you're new to the channel, hit the sub button and maybe the bell if you want to be updated for more Smite and other game content. And other than that, see you for the next one soon. DukeSloth, out.